All right, so it's March 16th. So we're about a month away from turkey season here in Michigan, and every week leading up to turkey season, I want to talk a little bit each week about how I hunt. And then this week, I'm going to talk about how I scout. I'm going to talk about the timelines, things to look for, stuff like that. But before I really get into detail, I think one of the most important things of any hunting in general, especially turkey hunting, is just being out there to scout. You know, there's been so many times where I got permission on a place and I'm watching these birds and it's early April and I'm scouting them and everything's looking good. The whole group's there, and then come a week before season, they just seem to disappear. As the weather gets nicer, they kind of start moving and dispersing out of their groups a little bit, and it's just, you got to be out there to be able to see where they're going once they do break up. Another thing too is relating to that is you don't want to scout too early, like in the beginning of April, and then not late, the week before, because like I said, there's been times where I've been on birds and think, yeah, I've got them, like I know right where I'm sitting opening morning, and then they change. I think people make that mistake quite a bit. So one thing I just want to talk about right now is kind of my timeline of what I'm doing right now and what I'll be doing, going up to turkey season. So right now, mainly, I'm still driving around. Like on my way home from work, I'll take the back roads and kind of drive by some spots and, just see if there's any groups of turkeys anywhere, and maybe I'll find a new group of turkeys and ask for permission on them. But for the most part, what I'm doing is talking to people where I've already had permission in the past and stopping and knocking on their door and making sure we're good to go for this turkey season. As we get later, like I said, this is March 16th, so we got a month left. As we get later into March, I'll continue to do the same thing, and I'll be looking more for those groups of birds for places to ask on. But really, once April hits is when I really start scouting quite a bit. In like the 2 weeks prior to season, one thing I like to do is if someone gives me permission on a piece, say it's in an area I haven't really hunted before, it's nice to go drive around that area, and maybe you'll find some more birds too. Because one thing that is nice when you have birds in an area, or you got a hunting spot in an area, it's nice to have one or two other spots right there close, so you're not driving 20 minutes and only have one property. You hunt it in the morning on the Roost, and you're done hunting it in the first hour, and you have nowhere to go except for driving way back the other way to get to your spots. And what that'll do for you too is it'll help you be more efficient when you're scouting. When you have a couple pieces of property in one area, say within a few miles of each other, and then have a couple in another area, you can hit more properties in one night. Say you're calling on the Roost trying to figure out where they're roosting at. You can hit all those properties in that one area one night, hit all the properties in the other area another night. But when you have a property that's all by itself, 20-25 minutes the other direction, it makes it hard to find the time to get over there, because everybody's busy, got lives. I don't just turkey hunt, I definitely work too. So some people don't think so, but I definitely do. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is like the timelines of the turkeys too. As I've kind of talked about, they'll be somewhere early April, and then as that weather gets nicer, you start seeing them out and about more in different places. And once it starts getting warmer and they start shifting a little bit, like if we get a cold snap, they're going to start doing something different for that cold snap. And you just got to remember, they're always somewhere. It's just like fishing tournaments. Someone's always catching fish. It seems like, if you're struggling, just know that somebody somewhere is catching fish. And it relates to this because somewhere there are turkeys. I find that when it's colder out, they don't get in the fields as much, like especially when it's windy too. They'll sit in like the river bottom type of stuff. Like Ty Heisler last year, he shot his bird. Whenever it's colder, birds seem to roost here quite a bit. And then once it starts getting warmer out, nicer out, and you start seeing birds out in fields more, they don't roost here so much. There's a lot of oaks in this little woods that they roost in. It's not very big. And then they literally, and I've seen them do it more than just last year, they'll pitch down into that woods and they'll sit there all morning long until like 9:30 or 10 and hardly move, looking for acorns, and it drops down into there too, so they're out of the wind, and eventually midday, they move. Usually it's to the west, but you just got to kind of figure that kind of stuff out. So there'll be properties that are good when it's cold, when it's windy, and then they might not be so good come May when it's a little bit warmer and nicer outside. And one thing that seems to help too is if you can learn when the birds use your property, if it's late or early, that'll help too. Like, for example, I know Pat Rankin, he's a guy that I've gotten a lot of turkey information from. He's taught me a lot of things. A lot of times, because in Michigan, normally the season is there's a 2-week season and then there's a 3-week season. The end of April into the first week of May and then through the rest of May. And Pat normally gets the later seasons because a lot of his ground that he turkey hunts, birds don't show up there until late. And it seemed like last year, last year Michigan changed their season, made it one whole long season from the 18th of April all the way through May, and so obviously he had a tag for that, but he really wasn't hunting very early because he knew like it's just not worth it right now. The birds aren't here on my properties right now. So he just waited until May, and he went and him and his son and his other son went and killed birds, and they always do every single year, and they always seem to be big ones too. And one thing that Pat's told me too is he feels like late season's better for killing the bigger birds, the older birds, because early season they seem to be so flocked up. If you aren't right on that flock, you're going to have a hard time calling those toms off. He talks about later in the season those toms being separated from those hens a little bit more, and he's able to kill them a little bit easier because they're not all henned up. And one thing I'll say about that, I definitely think he has a point because I have noticed that myself. Another thing though, you got to remember if you're going to wait to hunt, is a lot of times when you get to those birds that have in May, they've already been called to by somebody, whether it's your neighbor or you or whatever. So you're dealing a little bit more with pressured birds, more called to birds. So that's why I tend to hunt earlier, is because you can get on birds that haven't been called to, since last year, them, especially them first couple days, if you line your spots up right. And I'll talk about that in another video too that I think is really important. But you can stay on fresh birds for, a decent amount of time early on. With that being said, you got to realize though, although they might not have been called to yet, they're still going to be a little bit more henned up than what they are later season. So that's where your scouting really comes into play, and just knowing like where they roost. I'm going to come right back to that, but like where they roost, where they're, for the first place that they're going in the morning, that's really big, and the last place they're at night. So now I'm going to talk about finding the roost. I think that's one of the most important things. Obviously, the more you know, the better, but I think finding the roost is a great place to start. In the springtime, like starting a couple weeks into April, I'll start driving around to those areas, to properties in certain areas, and calling right before it gets dark and hearing and trying to hear them gobble and see where they're roosting at. Like my lease property where I deer hunted this year, he's going to let me turkey hunt as well. I know there's going to be a flock of birds there. Our field, or his field I should say, is one of the only like big crop fields in the section. There's a few other ones around the outskirts, but it's the main one, ours and the neighbors to the north there. But so I know there's going to be a flock of turkeys. I mean, there's a creek that goes through it, but there's so many different places where they could roost, where there's big enough trees and there's a little bit of water around. I don't know where they're going to roost. So there's a farm lane that goes all the way to the back, and I'll just start right at the front and start making some calls, and if I don't hear anything, I'll keep going, make some calls, keep going until I finally figure out where they're at. And then from there, I know they're probably going to be going from the west to the east, just like the deer do, right out to the destination field. So at that point, once I figure out where they're roosting, I'll come up with a game plan on where I want to sit to hunt them in the morning, because if you can help it, you don't want to get too close to the birds. If you know that they're going to be coming out to that field, or you've been scouting and you've been seeing them come out to that field, I stay away from the roost. But if you're not really sure of that, that's when you slip right on in there and right into their bedroom, and you got to be real early about it. And one thing related with that too, like Ty's bird last year, they were pitching down into our woods that we had permission on, and then shooting straight out to the west, like into the neighbors, like a CRP field, and going up to another oak flat. And so we knew we had to get really close to these birds on the roof, so you just got to be in there super early and know the direction that they're going to leave that woods. And I'm going to make a video pertaining to roost hunts, whether it be night roost hunts or morning roost hunts, in videos to come. So with that being said, I actually, while I was just watching the video that I just made, some sandhill cranes went off across the road and some birds gobbled, and almost every single year, this is a perfect example of everything I've been talking about. These birds across the road from my house, there's some ag fields on the other side of this section, but this time of year when it's cold, they're way over here, like by our house. There's a couple big knolls that they'll get up and roost on. But when it comes to turkey season, they're not there. So it's like that. Honestly, kind of just this interaction right here, growing up, kind of started making me think about that and start to realize that and understand that if you want to move forward, if you want to kill birds consistently, you got to figure out where they're at now, where they're at and next week, and where they're going to be after that. And the more you hunt a property and the more you live right across the street from it, the more you're going to know that. So with that being said, I hope you like what I had to say tonight. I'm going to be dropping more videos coming up turkey season. I hope you come back.